Hello, I'm Tom Shircliff with Intelligent Buildings, and first I'd just like to say thank you for having me at these technology days, and also thanks for having me at such an important time for all of us in the real estate related businesses. And on a topic like this, no time like the present, unprecedented era of opportunities and risk for building contractors, and I really do believe that is true. And maybe just a little bit of background on Intelligent Buildings. We are a 17-year-old smart building services company, and we have services in three areas. One is advisory services or consulting. The other one is assessments, so site assessments of existing portfolio for both risks and opportunities, and managed services, which is ongoing risk management services. Um, it's it really is a time that has been pretty burdened, if you will, by technology risks and opportunities. And then, of course, here comes the pandemic. So I'd like to give you some thoughts about that. But as it relates, I think this will be helpful to our customers that are senior managers and owners in the real estate environment. And our role is to understand how they make decisions, how they think, what matters to them, how they buy things, and why. And I think that will come across a little bit today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and we'll jump right in. So, what does the customer want? The ones that I'm referring to, and these are building owners and managers and executives. And some of these are cliche, but it's really what's finally happening in real estate and commercial real estate, and that is the convergence, of course, for interoperability. And we know as not only in the contractor community, but the system integrator and master system integrator, we're getting lots more of this interoperability. And of course, analytics stem from that, starting initially with fault detection and diagnostics, but now into many, many other kinds. And it wouldn't be a technology conversation without the IoT. And even in real estate, we're seeing more sensors and devices coming in pretty quickly. The dashboards are just making it easier to operate and consolidate information and views. And I couldn't overemphasize how much cybersecurity is coming up. It's obviously been a longstanding issue in IT and consumer technology, but now in operational technology and buildings, it is really ramping up. And we've been focused on this probably 5 or 6 years pretty intensely. And I will tell you, in the past year and a half, maybe two, it is really on a tear. And then, of course, everybody wants in any business, but certainly in real estate, where you have people and buildings, business continuity and disaster recovery are very important. So, just a little background on the customer. Now, this is something that I know most of the audience know, but let's realize that a lot of times our customers don't really think of it in these terms. We're all just so used to doing our daily business that they don't get a choice about whether or not they're going to have a high-tech building. They may have a definition of a smart building, but for decades now, we all know these building control systems have been digital, right? They have computers, software revision, they have little networks, they're connected to the internet. There's a lot of IT and digital aspects to building control systems. And listen, it's no mystery that they've been designed, installed, and managed by at least a non-IT value chain or non-traditional IT value chain. And it's interesting when I tell some of our customers, hey, did you ever wonder why big IT, so to speak, is not really deeply in this part of the business? Where's IBM, Accenture, Microsoft, et cetera? Now, they're great companies and they have tangential roles, but typically those aren't the names you see. And we also know that these systems are, for the most part, designed, installed, and managed separately. Just to state the obvious, typically a parking controls contractor doesn't manage your elevator system, and so on. And then there's turnover with the contractors and staff and property, entire property management companies turnover. So this is a little bit, in some ways, of it's kind of a scattered mess in some ways if you're trying to create a homogeneous technology and cybersecurity environment. And just to take that a little bit further, we have this pyramid we've come up with just to show and remind that, and you cut all these numbers in half or whatever you like, but to use round numbers, if you have 100 buildings, you have hundreds of service contractor companies. And that is affected by, of course, the customer makeup. A lot of times they have joint ventures and partnerships and regions and reasons why they can't contract things together. So there's a lot of them. And then again, pick your number. This shows 6 control systems in each building. So 600 building control systems. And whatever the number is, thousands of technicians can touch the systems in your building. So just imagine you're an executive charged with either cybersecurity and risk management, or and maybe both, the sort of an interoperable, integrated environment to get data out and so forth. This looks pretty challenging. And so I just like to remind, that the previous slide and this slide is what the owners and managers are up against. And I also want to say, from a risk perspective, it's not a theoretical idea. So these are customers that we know of that have had really serious problems. And you might say, why isn't this stuff, in the news? Well, if it's not personal information, it doesn't have to be. And of course, nobody wants to put it in the news, but we're seeing lots of it. So a big healthcare organization pulled one user credential out and hundreds of sites went down. A Fortune 500 headquarters building had their IT staff try to really take over all of the OT, or building control systems, operational technology building control systems networks, and knocked them almost all offline. And then a commercial or REIT company had, we all know, ransomware, but it was a really bad problem, and multiple HVAC systems went down, and then they had to either pay the Bitcoin or rebuild the systems after that. So, and we could go on and on with these examples. We just like for people to know that because it's not on the cover of the Wall Street Journal doesn't mean it's not happening. It's happening quite a bit. And then as you see on the bottom there, studies show between 5 and 10 times the amount of hacking and cybercrime during the pandemic. And we do hundreds of phishing campaigns for building contractor staff. And for some reason, they're opening up phishing emails at twice the rate of the general public. Now, to be fair, I think that's because it's such a narrowly crafted phishing campaign. It's not just you get a free Amazon gift card. It's, the OEM contractor says you need to do this for coronavirus best practices in your system or something like that. So it's a very specific target, but it's also very, very real. So speaking of the pandemic, what we are seeing is a whole new area of use cases. And the interesting thing is, most of them are control systems and contractor related. So again, there's a tremendous opportunity here. And just a little perspective on the way we view use cases is that we found that the decision makers were much more comfortable talking about a use case, which is really what's going to happen in the outcome, rather than systems and technology, because that's kind of a never-ending conversation. And so the use cases can be in categories like life safety, operational efficiency, user experience, and as we see here, public health is now a category, and that has subcategories. And that you can see contractors and occupants and systems and environmental. And just to give you a quick example, a touchless experience is not a cliche. It might actually be an access control system that opens a door for you, that also communicates to your destination dispatch elevator, that also communicates to your digital signage to give instructions, all working together to get you, and maybe even the parking control system, all to get you from your car to your desk on the 10th floor without touching anything. So that is a use case, it's an outcome, but really what we see here, it's contractors and control systems that make that happen. So just some perspective here on that role in the public health environment. So, we've talked about the technology in buildings, historically speaking. We've talked about the silos and the fragmentation and then the pandemic. And so, let's roll that all up to say, what are customers doing about this? And this was trending before the pandemic and even more now. Well, one is they're taking much more of a top-down approach. So we all know that lots of expertise sits with design and engineering and contractors and OEMs. And so because of that, historically, there was a lot of bottoms up. This is the system that will fit in that building, that kind of thing. But what we're seeing now is, because of strategic reasons and big data, and now for public health, and how many times a day do you see a CEO talk about how they will and won't use buildings and when they will and won't go back? So top down is really, it was building, and now it's got even more momentum in terms of decisions that get made in a real estate environment, commercial real estate. The other one is that was building before the pandemic also, and more now, is consolidating vendors and contractors. When you're dealing in a risk environment, moving parts are not good. So you need fewer moving parts, and you also need to be able to communicate your policy and have policy compliance. And you just can't do that if you have too many places to go do that. So that's something to be aware of. And then they're, as I mentioned earlier, very serious about cybersecurity. And I put and system configuration because sometimes people include that in cybersecurity. Sometimes people mean cybersecurity is remote access and the IT pieces. And when I say system configuration, we're talking, and by the way, we think that is as important or more so, and sometimes call it the Alamo, because a building control system's passwords, lockouts, current software revision, whether it's been backed up, whether all the user credentials have been updated and old users taken out, those are very important and can undermine other forms of cybersecurity. So that's what they're thinking. Now, what can a contractor or system integrator do about that previous slide? Well, I would say we've had this conversation with building owners and managers as well as contractors and system integrators, and that is to be proactive on cybersecurity and your system configuration and how you approach the public health situation with your company and your staff. Next, acknowledge the pandemic, the difference in contractor stakeholder role. What I mean by that is, let's say tenants, for example, have HR policy they can impose on their employees. They can take temperatures. They can really do whatever, do a lot of almost whatever they want, which is not the same as the general public, which is not the same as the property management community. And I'm just saying that contractors are a stakeholder category of their own. So acknowledge that and kind of work it into the puzzle pieces of the bigger picture. Show that you see beyond the daily issues. What I mean by that is, in this uncertain time and this risk-laden time, if the decision makers understand that that your role is part of the whole building, or maybe even the portfolio, that just makes them have to explain less. It gives them more confidence, and it shows that you understand, what the building is trying to do in the bigger picture. And finally, after doing, I guess you might call those somewhat defensive moves, it also will allow you then for some very value creating change orders and sticky services. And I don't mean that just from a self-interest. I mean, it's also good for the customer. So this a little bit broader thinking, a little more proactive approach, I think is going to serve you very well. And here's just a couple of things that we do, not a commercial, but just we leverage a software partner with our building owner customers as well as our contractor and integrator friends to. One of the things it does is really a very simple CDC type screen, and then it gives a boarding pass. And so it's a red X or a green check, and your QR code is good for however many days you or the customer says that it's good for. Very simple, but very thoughtful, very proactive, confidence inspiring, and also allows for reporting from a liability perspective, because regrettably that may be the next phase that we're in, is sort of a liability and finger pointing phase. We mentioned earlier the system configuration. There are a couple of things about this. One is, you just need to run a better railroad. In other words, internally, we want contractors and system integrators to know themselves from a management perspective about their passwords, lockouts, backups, user credentials, if the software is current, et cetera. We mentioned the health risk screen and even phishing training. Now, one thing I will acknowledge is that there are some depths of this that are not in sort of regular service call relationships, and maybe not even in some service contracts. And that's the example earlier, that do the things that you should be doing to serve the customer better on this list, and then take the opportunity to go to the customer with either a change order or service contract conversation, because that's the way the building should be. So it's both good for the vendor and good for the customer. So let's bring it back full circle here and say that these are the kind of big picture things that the customer wants, and I feel strongly if we consider the things that we've talked about today, you're going to help the customer get to this area faster. You're also going to be uh, in some ways benefit from the consolidation, and just going to run a better, safer business. Um, and that's really it. I just like to say again how much I appreciate being here. And I'd like to offer, I didn't have it on the screen, but my email is simply tom@intelligentbuildings.com. And I'd be happy to take any questions from the owner, manager, contractor, integrator community about what we've talked about today or the industry in general. We enjoy having a bit of an educational and evangelical role in the industry. So once again, thanks for having me, and hope to be in touch soon.